The courtroom went completely silent when the little girl raised her trembling hand and pointed. But she wasn't pointing at the defendant. Her finger aimed straight at a police dog sitting in the back row. And what happened next made everyone start screaming. Because that's when the German Shepherd did something he'd never done in 4 years of service. He ignored his handler's command and started walking toward her. His growl echoed through the courtroom as his body lowered into attack position. But he wasn't focused on the little girl. The girl's finger moved again, this time pointing at a well-dressed woman sitting in the third row. Someone who looked like she belonged there. That's when the dog did something that changed everything. He walked straight to that woman and gave the alert signal every officer fears. The woman shot to her feet, screaming, "I don't even know this child!" But the little girl's next words froze everyone in place. "She was there," the girl whispered. "In the bad place. She gave me the juice that made me sleep." And that's when the dog detected what no human could smell. Security detained the woman and opened her purse. Inside, they found something that made the entire courtroom gasp. What they discovered didn't just save that little girl. It exposed a trafficking network that spanned 4 states and saved 17 children. And it all started because a 7-year-old had the courage to point, and a dog refused to ignore what he sensed. Stay until the end, because what happens between this girl and this dog will restore your faith in everything. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. The kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes every heartbeat feel too loud. Rows of wooden benches creaked under the weight of anxious spectators. Lawyers shuffled papers with trembling hands. The judge sat elevated behind her bench, her expression carved from stone, revealing nothing. In the center of it all sat a little girl, no more than 7 years old. Her legs dangled from the witness chair, too short to reach the floor. Her blonde hair was pulled into 2 neat braids, though a few strands had come loose, framing a face far too pale for a child her age. She wore a simple white dress, her small hands clutching a worn stuffed rabbit so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. No one knew her name yet. The court documents listed her only as Witness 12, a Jane Doe, a ghost in the system. But everyone in that room felt her presence like a storm gathering on the horizon. The prosecutor stood near the front, his suit pressed and perfect, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. This case had haunted him for months, a trafficking ring that had operated in the shadows for years, moving children across state lines, destroying families, shattering lives. And now finally they had their chance. The evidence was there. The testimonies lined up. But without this little girl's statement, the whole case could collapse. The defense attorney, a sharp woman in a charcoal suit, watched the child with calculating eyes. She knew the power of silence. She knew how to break witnesses. And children, they were the easiest to discredit. Too emotional, too unreliable, too easily confused. But what no one in that courtroom knew, what no one could have possibly anticipated, was that this little girl wasn't alone. Seated in the back corner of the room, perfectly still and perfectly silent, was a police dog, a German shepherd named Atlas. His handler, Officer Marcus Reed, sat beside him, one hand resting lightly on the dog's vest. Atlas's amber eyes swept the room with quiet authority, his ears alert, his body coiled with restrained power. Atlas wasn't just any canine, he was a victim advocate dog, trained to detect trauma, to sense fear, to comfort those who had been through the unthinkable. He'd worked dozens of cases, sitting beside children in rooms just like this one, offering silent support when words failed. But today felt different. Marcus could feel it in the way Atlas's muscles tensed beneath his hand. The dog's gaze hadn't left the little girl since they'd entered the room. The judge cleared her throat, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. "The witness may begin when ready," she said, her voice measured and calm. The prosecutor stepped forward, his expression gentle. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "I know this is hard, but we need you to tell us what you remember, in your own words. Take your time." The little girl didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the table in front of her. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Seconds stretched into a full minute. The courtroom waited. The prosecutor tried again. Can you tell us your name? Nothing. Do you remember the people who brought you here? Still nothing. The defense attorney shifted in her seat, a faint smile touching her lips. She'd seen this before. Trauma-induced silence. The child wouldn't speak, couldn't speak, and without her testimony, there was nothing. But then something changed. The little girl's fingers stopped trembling. Her head tilted slightly, just a fraction, as if she'd heard something no one else could. And then slowly, so slowly that half the room didn't notice at first, she raised her hand. Her small finger extended, pointing toward the back of the courtroom. Confusion rippled through the crowd. People turned in their seats, following the direction of her gesture. The prosecutor frowned. "Sweetheart, what are you?" But before he could finish, the little girl spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper, cracked and fragile, but clear enough to be heard. "The dog," she said. "I want the dog." Every eye in the room turned to Atlas. The German shepherd sat perfectly still, his gaze locked on the child. And then, without warning, without command, he stood. Marcus's hand instinctively tightened on the leash. "Atlas, stay," he murmured, but the dog didn't listen. Atlas took one step forward, then another. His movements were slow, deliberate, purposeful. The judge leaned forward. "Officer, control your animal." "Your Honor, I—" Marcus started, but Atlas was already moving. The courtroom erupted into whispers. Some people gasped. Others reached for their phones. But the little girl's expression changed. For the first time since entering that room, her eyes filled with something other than fear. They filled with recognition. "Atlas," she whispered, and the dog responded, not with a bark, not with aggression, but with a sound so low, so guttural, that it sent chills down every spine in the room. It was a growl of warning, of protection, of rage barely contained, because Atlas had just sensed something no human in that courtroom had noticed. Something hidden, something dangerous. And what happened next would turn a routine testimony into a moment that would be talked about for years. A moment that would save more lives than anyone could have imagined. The prosecutor froze mid-step, his mouth hanging open. The defense attorney shot to her feet, her face flushing red. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. That animal needs to be removed immediately." The judge raised her hand, commanding silence. Her eyes swept from Atlas to the little girl, then to Officer Reed. "Officer," she said firmly. "Explain." Marcus stood, his hand still gripping the leash, though Atlas showed no sign of returning to his side. "Your Honor, Atlas is a trained victim advocate dog. He's never disobeyed a command in 4 years of service. If he's reacting this way, there's a reason." "And what reason would that be?" the defense attorney snapped. "This is a courtroom, not a circus. That child is clearly frightened by the dog." But the little girl shook her head violently. "No," she said, her voice stronger now. "He's not scary. He knows." The room fell silent again. The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Knows what, child?" The girl's hands trembled as she pointed again, but this time not at Atlas. Her finger moved across the courtroom, past the rows of spectators, past the court reporter, and stopped on someone sitting in the third row. A woman in a navy blazer and pearl earrings. She looked like any other professional observer. Neat hair, calm expression, nothing out of place. "Her," the little girl whispered. "She was there." The woman's face drained of color. She stood abruptly, her purse clutched to her chest. "This is absurd. I don't even know this child." But Atlas's growl deepened. The dog's body lowered into a stance Marcus had only seen a handful of times. A threat stance, protective and ready. "Officer Reed," the judge said sharply, "restrain your dog, now." Marcus pulled gently on the leash, but Atlas resisted. His eyes never left the woman. "Your Honor," Marcus said carefully, "with all due respect, I trust my partner's instincts. If he's alerting to someone in this courtroom, we need to investigate." The prosecutor's eyes lit up. "Your Honor, I request that the woman be detained for questioning." "On what grounds?" the defense attorney shouted. "The word of a traumatized child and an animal?" The judge's gavel slammed down, the sound echoing like thunder. "Order! Everyone sit down, now!" But the woman didn't sit. She took a step toward the exit. Atlas barked once, sharp and commanding. The sound made everyone freeze. Court security moved instinctively toward the doors, blocking her path. "Ma'am," one of the officers said firmly, "please remain seated." The woman's hands shook. Sweat glistened on her forehead. "I have rights. You can't hold me without cause." The little girl's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "She smells like them," she said, her voice breaking. "Like the bad place. Like the room with no windows. Atlas can smell it too. That's why he knows." Marcus's heart pounded. He'd worked with Atlas long enough to understand what was happening. The dog wasn't reacting to fear or aggression. He was detecting a scent, a specific trained scent, one that had been burned into his memory through months of specialized training. "Your Honor," Marcus said quietly, "Atlas is cross-trained in detection. He's certified to identify traces of chemical sedatives used in trafficking cases." The courtroom erupted. The defense attorney shouted objections. The prosecutor demanded an immediate search. The judge slammed her gavel again and again, trying to restore order. But through it all, Atlas never moved. His eyes stayed locked on the woman. And the little girl, for the first time in months, smiled. A small, fragile smile. Because for the first time since her nightmare began, someone believed her. Not just someone, a four-legged guardian who could sense the truth when humans couldn't. The judge's voice finally cut through the chaos. "Bailiff, detain that woman. Officer Reed, I want your dog to conduct a scent examination. Defense, you have 30 seconds to object, or I'm proceeding." The defense attorney opened her mouth, but no words came out. She knew. They all knew. Something far bigger than a routine testimony was unfolding in that courtroom. And as security escorted the trembling woman to the side of the room, as Atlas moved forward with Marcus at his side, as the little girl clutched her rabbit and watched with wide, hopeful eyes, everyone realized the same thing. This case had just changed forever. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Every eye followed Officer Marcus Reed and Atlas as they approached the detained woman. She stood rigid against the wall, flanked by two bailiffs, her face a mask of forced composure. But her hands betrayed her. They trembled violently, fingers twisting around the strap of her purse. "Ma'am," Marcus said calmly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I need you to place your bag on the table and step back." "This is a violation of my rights," she hissed, but her voice cracked on the last word. The judge's voice was ice. "You are in my courtroom, and a trained detection dog has alerted to you. Place the bag down. Now." The woman's eyes darted toward the exit, then back to Atlas. The German shepherd sat perfectly still, but his gaze was unwavering, predatory, patient. After a long moment, she set the purse down with shaking hands and stepped back. Marcus gave Atlas the command. "Seek." The dog moved forward, nose lowering to the bag. He circled it once, twice, then sat. The signal was unmistakable, positive alert. The prosecutor surged forward. "Your Honor, I request permission to search the bag." The defense attorney sputtered. "This is inadmissible. The search is unlawful. You can't—" "I can and I will," the judge interrupted. "Bailiff, open the bag." The courtroom leaned forward collectively as the bailiff snapped on a pair of latex gloves and unzipped the purse. He pulled out the contents methodically, a wallet, keys, tissues, and then something that made him pause. A small glass vial, no bigger than a lipstick tube, filled with clear liquid. "What is that?" the judge demanded. The bailiff held it up to the light. "Looks like some kind of medication, Your Honor." Marcus stepped closer, his heart pounding. "Atlas is trained to detect gamma-hydroxybutyrate, GHB. It's odorless to humans, but dogs can pick up trace amounts even through sealed containers." The prosecutor's face went pale with realization. "That's a date rape drug. It's also used in trafficking to sedate victims." The woman lunged forward suddenly, her composure shattering. "That's not mine. Someone must have planted it. I've never seen that before in my life." But Atlas growled again, low and deep. He moved toward the woman herself now, sniffing the air around her coat, her sleeves. Then he sat again. "Another alert." Marcus's voice was grim. She's been in direct contact with the substance recently. The little girl's voice rang out from the witness stand, small but certain. She gave me juice. In the bad place, it made me sleepy. I didn't want to drink it, but she said I had to. The courtroom exploded. Spectators gasped. Reporters scribbled furiously. The prosecutor looked like he'd just witnessed a miracle. The defense attorney sank into her chair, her face ashen. The judge slammed her gavel so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. Order! Order in this court! The woman's mask cracked completely. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage. You don't understand, she sobbed. I didn't have a choice. They would have killed me. I was just... Save it, the judge snapped. Bailiff, place her under arrest. Read her rights. As the cuffs clicked around the woman's wrists, she thrashed wildly. This isn't over. There are others. You have no idea how deep this goes. You've only scratched the surface. The prosecutor stepped forward quickly. Your Honor, I request an immediate recess. We need to question this woman and coordinate with law enforcement. If what she's saying is true... Granted, the judge said. Court is in recess for 2 hours. Officer Reed, your dog stays. I want a full report on what just happened here. As the bailiffs dragged the screaming woman out of the courtroom, chaos erupted. People shouted questions. Cameras flashed. But through it all, Atlas remained calm. He walked slowly back to the little girl who had climbed down from the witness stand. She dropped to her knees and threw her arms around his neck. Thank you, she whispered into his fur. Thank you for hearing me. Atlas's tail wagged once, slow, gentle. He pressed his head against her chest, and for the first time in months, the little girl felt safe. Marcus knelt beside them, his throat tight with emotion. You were so brave, he said softly. Both of you. The prosecutor approached, his eyes shining. Officer, I don't know how to thank you. If it weren't for Atlas... Marcus shook his head. Don't thank me. Thank her. He gestured to the little girl. She's the one who knew. She's the one who had the courage to point. The prosecutor looked at the child, his expression full of wonder and sorrow. What's your name, sweetheart? Your real name? The little girl hesitated, then spoke quietly. Emma. My name is Emma. Well, Emma, the prosecutor said, his voice thick. You just helped us catch someone we've been hunting for 2 years. You're a hero. Emma shook her head. Atlas is the hero. He listened when no one else would. And as the courtroom slowly emptied, as reporters rushed to file their stories, as law enforcement scrambled to follow the new lead, one truth became crystal clear. A little girl and a loyal dog had just torn open a case that would save dozens of lives. And this was only the beginning. 2 hours felt like 2 minutes. The courtroom had transformed from a place of quiet procedure into the nerve center of a sprawling investigation. Police officers in plainclothes moved through the hallways. FBI agents conferred in hushed voices. And in a small room adjacent to the main hall, Emma sat with Atlas at her side, a child psychologist speaking to her gently while Marcus stood guard at the door. The woman who'd been arrested, identified now as Diane Mercer, had broken within 30 minutes of interrogation. Not out of remorse, but out of fear. Fear of the people above her. Fear of what they'd do if they discovered she'd been caught. And so she talked. She gave names, locations, patterns. Enough to make the prosecutor's hands shake as he read the transcripts. When court reconvened, the atmosphere had changed entirely. The judge's face was grave. The defense attorney looked like she'd aged 10 years. And the defendant, the man whose trafficking operation had destroyed countless lives, sat pale and silent in his chair, finally understanding that his carefully constructed empire was crumbling. The prosecutor stood, his voice steady but laced with fury. Your Honor, in light of new evidence provided by witness testimony and the detention of Diane Mercer, the state has uncovered a network of co-conspirators operating across 4 states. We have coordinates for 3 additional locations where victims are currently being held. Law enforcement is moving on those locations as we speak. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge raised her hand for silence. Continue. Furthermore, the prosecutor said, his eyes burning into the defendant, Diane Mercer has provided detailed testimony implicating the defendant not only in trafficking, but in the distribution of controlled substances used to sedate victims. We have physical evidence, witness testimony, and now, thanks to the alert work of Officer Reed and his canine partner Atlas, we have proof of active sedation tactics used within the organization. The defense attorney rose shakily. Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence. This is all circumstantial. Sit down, the judge said coldly. I've heard enough. The little girl, Emma, had been brought back into the courtroom. She sat in the witness chair again, but this time Atlas sat directly beside her, his head resting on her lap. The judge looked at her with an expression that was almost tender. Emma, the judge said gently, you've been very brave today. Do you think you can answer a few more questions? Emma nodded, her fingers buried in Atlas's fur. The prosecutor approached slowly. Emma, when you pointed at that woman earlier, you said she gave you juice. Can you tell us more about that? Emma's voice was small but clear. She came to the room every day, the room with the locked door. She'd bring juice in a little cup and say I had to drink it or I wouldn't get dinner. It tasted funny, like medicine, and then everything would get blurry and I'd fall asleep. And how did you know it was her today? It's been months since you were rescued. Emma looked at Atlas. I remembered her voice and her smell. She wore a lot of perfume. It made my nose hurt. When she stood up in the court, I smelled it again. And then Atlas growled, and I knew he smelled it too. The bad smell underneath the perfume. The prosecutor's voice was gentle but firm. Emma, do you see the man who was in charge of that place? The man who hurt you and the other children? Emma's eyes swept the courtroom. They landed on the defendant. Her entire body tensed. Atlas immediately stood, pressing against her leg, a warm, solid presence. Him, she whispered. He was the one who locked the doors. The defendant shot to his feet, his face contorted with rage. She's lying. This is a setup. That dog is trained to react. This whole thing is... Sit down, the judge roared. One more outburst and you'll be removed from this courtroom. But the damage was done. The jury had seen his rage, his desperation, and they'd seen the terror in Emma's eyes when she looked at him. The prosecutor turned to the judge. Your Honor, the state rests. We have overwhelming evidence, multiple witnesses, and physical proof of the defendant's crimes. We ask that bail be revoked immediately and that the defendant be remanded into custody pending sentencing. The judge didn't hesitate. Granted. Bailiff, take him into custody. As the officers moved forward, the defendant thrashed against their grip. You have no idea what you've done, he snarled. This doesn't end with me. They'll find her. They'll find all of you. But his threats were drowned out by the sound of the gavel. This court is adjourned, the judge said. The defendant will remain in custody without bail. Sentencing will be scheduled within 30 days. And just like that, it was over. The courtroom erupted into applause. Reporters rushed for the doors. The prosecutor slumped in his chair, relief flooding his face. But Emma didn't celebrate. She just held Atlas tighter, her small frame shaking with silent sobs. Not sobs of fear, but of release, of finally being believed, of finally being safe. Marcus knelt beside her. You did it, Emma. You were so brave. She looked up at him with tear-filled eyes. Can Atlas come home with me? Marcus's throat tightened. He has to work, sweetheart. He helps other kids like you. But what if I get scared again? Marcus glanced at Atlas, then back at Emma. Tell you what, how about Atlas and I come visit you, as often as you need? Deal? Emma's face lit up, a genuine smile breaking through the tears. Deal. And as they walked out of that courtroom together, the little girl, the loyal dog, and the officer who believed in both of them, the world outside had already changed. News vans lined the street. Headlines were being written. But none of that mattered as much as the small hand that reached down to rest on a dog's head, finding comfort in the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Because sometimes justice isn't delivered by judges or lawyers. Sometimes it's delivered by a little girl brave enough to point and a dog loyal enough to listen. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The case that had started in that courtroom became a national story. Emma's identity was kept sealed, but everyone knew about the little girl who'd pointed at a trafficker and the dog who'd confirmed her truth. Atlas became something of a legend in law enforcement circles. Requests poured in from departments across the country wanting to learn his training protocols. Marcus found himself giving interviews, though he deflected every compliment back to Emma and to the countless other victims who'd never had their day in court. But the real work was happening behind the scenes. The information Diane Mercer provided led to raids on 3 locations across 2 states. 17 children were recovered. 12 adults were arrested. And with each new piece of evidence, the case against the trafficking ring grew stronger. Emma was placed in protective custody with a foster family who specialized in trauma care. They had a big backyard, a kind golden retriever named Sunny, and most importantly, they had patience. Emma didn't speak much in those first few weeks. She'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night, convinced she was back in the locked room. But slowly, with therapy and love and time, the nightmares began to fade. True to his word, Marcus brought Atlas to visit every week. The first time the German Shepherd walked through the door of the foster home, Emma burst into tears and ran to him. Atlas sat perfectly still as she buried her face in his fur, his tail wagging slowly, gently. "He remembers me," she whispered. "He'll never forget you," Marcus said. "You're part of his story now." Those visits became sacred. Emma would sit in the backyard with Atlas, talking to him about everything, her fears, her memories, her hopes for a new life. And Atlas would listen, his amber eyes warm and understanding, his presence a constant reminder that she was safe. One afternoon, Marcus arrived to find Emma drawing pictures at the kitchen table. She looked up when he entered, her face breaking into a smile. "Atlas, you came!" The dog trotted over, tail wagging, and Emma wrapped her arms around his neck. "I made something for you," she said, holding up a drawing. It showed a little girl and a big dog standing in a courtroom. Above them, she'd written in careful letters, "My hero." Marcus's throat tightened. "That's beautiful." "Emma, can I give it to him?" "He'd be honored." Emma carefully folded the paper and tucked it into Atlas's vest pocket. The dog sat patiently, as if he understood the significance of the gesture. The foster mother, a kind woman named Susan, approached with glasses of lemonade. "She talks about Atlas every day," Susan said quietly to Marcus. "That dog gave her something we couldn't. The belief that good things exist in this world." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. As summer turned to fall, Emma's progress was remarkable. She enrolled in school, made friends, even joined a youth soccer team. But every week, without fail, she'd ask when Atlas was coming to visit. And every week, Marcus would show up, sometimes in uniform, sometimes not, but always with his loyal partner at his side. One evening, as the sun set over the backyard and Emma threw a tennis ball for Atlas to retrieve, she turned to Marcus with a serious expression. "Do you think Atlas saved other kids too?" Marcus nodded. "He has, and he will again." "Good," Emma said firmly, "because everyone should have someone like him, someone who listens even when you can't use words." Marcus looked at her, this brave little girl who'd survived the unthinkable, and felt pride swell in his chest. "You know what, Emma? You're going to help other kids too someday. I can feel it." She tilted her head, considering. "Maybe I'll work with dogs like Atlas, so other kids won't be so scared. I think you'd be incredible at that." Emma smiled, then ran off to throw the ball again. Atlas bounded after it, his joy infectious, his purpose clear. And as Marcus watched them play, he realized something profound. This case hadn't just been about catching criminals. It had been about restoring faith. Faith that justice could prevail, faith that trauma could heal, faith that a little girl's voice mattered. And at the center of it all was a German shepherd who'd done what he was trained to do: protect the vulnerable, detect the truth, and offer comfort when the world felt too dark to bear. The trial date arrived on a cold November morning. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters, activists, and survivors who'd come to witness the final chapter of a case that had captivated the nation. Inside, the courtroom was standing room only. Emma wasn't required to testify again. The earlier testimony and the mountain of evidence that followed was more than enough. But she'd asked to be there for the sentencing. She wanted to look him in the eye one more time, not as a victim, but as a survivor. Marcus sat beside her in the front row, Atlas lying calmly at their feet. Emma wore a blue dress her foster mother had bought her, and she clutched the stuffed rabbit she'd carried into court that first day. But this time, her grip was loose, casual. The rabbit was no longer a lifeline. It was just a comfort. The defendant was brought in, his hands cuffed, his face gaunt from months in custody. He didn't look at Emma, didn't look at anyone. He kept his eyes on the floor as the charges were read. 17 counts of human trafficking, 12 counts of child endangerment, 9 counts of distribution of controlled substances, 4 counts of conspiracy. And that was just the beginning. The judge's voice was measured, but carried the weight of mountains. The evidence presented in this case is among the most disturbing I've encountered in 30 years on the bench. The defendant orchestrated a systematic operation designed to exploit the most vulnerable members of our society. Children were drugged, transported, and sold like commodities. Lives were destroyed. Families were shattered. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing. However, the judge continued, this case also demonstrated something remarkable: the courage of one child who refused to be silenced, the dedication of law enforcement officers who believed her, and the instincts of a service dog who detected what no human could see. Emma's hand found Atlas's head, her fingers curling into his fur. The judge looked directly at the defendant. You will spend the rest of your life in prison. No possibility of parole. And I hope every day of that sentence reminds you of the lives you tried to destroy and the justice they ultimately found. The gavel fell. The sound echoed through the room like a thunderclap. And then for a moment, there was only silence. Then applause. It started slow, a few people in the back, then spread like wildfire through the courtroom. People stood. They clapped. Some cried. Emma looked around in wonder, her eyes wide. They're clapping for you, Marcus whispered. For your courage. Emma shook her head. They should clap for Atlas. As if on cue, Atlas stood and gave a single, dignified bark. The courtroom erupted in laughter through their tears. Even the judge smiled. Outside, the November air was crisp and clean. Emma stood on the courthouse steps, flanked by her foster parents, Marcus and Atlas. Reporters shouted questions, but Marcus held up a hand. Emma would like to say something, he announced. The crowd quieted instantly. Cameras focused. Emma looked tiny standing there, but when she spoke, her voice carried. I want to thank Atlas, she said, looking down at the German shepherd sitting proudly beside her. He heard me when I couldn't speak loud enough. He believed me when people didn't want to listen, and he made me feel safe when I thought I'd never feel safe again. She paused, tears shimmering in her eyes. There are other kids who need someone like Atlas. Kids who are still scared, still trapped, still waiting for someone to believe them. I hope there are more dogs like him, more officers like Marcus, because everyone deserves to be heard. The crowd was silent, many openly crying. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then everyone. The applause washed over Emma like a wave, and for the first time since her ordeal began, she felt something new. Hope. That night, long after the cameras had left and the courthouse had emptied, Marcus sat in his small apartment with Atlas curled up at his feet. The news played on the television, showing clips of Emma's speech, replaying the dramatic courtroom moments. His phone rang. It was the chief. Reed, you watching this? Yes, sir. Good, because I've had 17 departments call today asking about victim advocate dog programs. Your case just changed how we do this work. Marcus looked down at Atlas, who gazed back with those knowing amber eyes. It wasn't me, Chief. It was him. Well, both of you better get used to the attention. This is just the beginning. After hanging up, Marcus knelt beside Atlas and scratched behind his ears. You know what you did, don't you, boy? You didn't just solve a case. You gave voice to the voiceless. Atlas's tail thumped against the floor. And that little girl, she's going to change the world someday. I can feel it. Atlas tilted his head as if considering. Then he laid his head on Marcus's knee, content. Because for a dog like Atlas, the praise didn't matter. The fame didn't matter. What mattered was the little hand that had clutched his fur in a moment of terror, the small voice that had whispered thank you, the life he'd helped save. That was enough. That was everything. And somewhere across town, in a warm house with a backyard and a kind family, Emma lay in bed with her stuffed rabbit. On her nightstand was a framed photo from the courthouse steps, Atlas sitting proudly beside her, both of them smiling. She looked at it every night before sleep, a reminder that she'd survived, that she'd spoken, that she'd been heard, and tomorrow she'd wake up and live another day. Stronger, braver, free, because a little girl had pointed at a dog, and that dog had changed everything. 5 years passed. Emma grew from a frightened 7-year-old into a confident 12-year-old with dreams bigger than anyone expected. She excelled in school, made lasting friendships, and most remarkably, she never stopped talking about Atlas. Her room was filled with photos of German shepherds, books about canine training, and certificates from volunteer work she'd done at local animal shelters. True to her word, Emma had found her purpose. With the support of her foster parents, who'd officially adopted her on her 10th birthday, she started a youth organization called Atlas's Voice. It connected child trauma survivors with therapy dogs, helping kids find the same comfort and courage she discovered in that courtroom years ago. Marcus stayed in touch, visiting regularly with Atlas. But time, as it always does, began to take its toll. Atlas was aging. The once powerful German shepherd moved a little slower now, his muzzle gray, his step less certain. He'd been retired from active duty at age 9, spending his final working year training the next generation of victim advocate dogs. On a bright spring morning, Marcus received a call he'd been dreading. Atlas had collapsed during their morning walk. The vet's diagnosis was gentle but final. His heart was giving out. He had days, maybe a week. Marcus called Emma immediately. She arrived within the hour, her parents driving her straight from school. She burst through the door of Marcus's home and dropped to her knees beside the old dog. Atlas lifted his head weakly, his tail giving a faint wag. "Hey, hero," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here." Atlas's eyes brightened. He pressed his nose into her palm, the same gesture he'd given her that day in the courtroom so many years ago. Marcus watched from the doorway, his own eyes wet. "He's been waiting for you," he said softly. "I think he knew." Emma lay down beside Atlas, wrapping her arms gently around him. "You saved my life," she whispered. "Do you know that? You gave me everything. You made me brave." Atlas's breathing was labored but peaceful. His eyes never left Emma's face. "I'm going to help so many kids," Emma continued, her voice breaking. "Just like you helped me. I promise. Your legacy won't end. It's just beginning." Marcus brought a blanket and laid it over both of them. For hours, Emma stayed there, telling Atlas stories about her life, her dreams, the children she'd already helped through her organization. She told him about the new canine training facility that was being built in his honor, funded by donations that had poured in after the trial. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the window, Atlas's breathing slowed. Emma felt it. She pressed her forehead against his, tears falling into his fur. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for hearing me. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for loving me when I thought no one could." Atlas's tail moved one final time, a small, gentle wag. And then he was gone. The funeral was held at the police training facility. Officers came from across the country, some traveling thousands of miles to pay their respects. A flag-draped casket held Atlas's remains. Emma stood beside Marcus as the chief delivered a eulogy. "Atlas was more than a dog," the chief said, his voice thick with emotion. "He was a guardian, a protector, a voice for those who couldn't speak. In his 9 years of service, he assisted in 73 cases. He comforted hundreds of victims. And he changed the way we approach trauma-informed justice." A 21-gun salute echoed across the field. Taps played. Emma clutched a folded flag that had been presented to her, her face stoic but her eyes red. When it was over, when the crowd had dispersed and the sun had set, Emma stood alone at Atlas's memorial stone. Marcus had given her privacy, understanding she needed this moment. "I kept my promise," she said to the stone, which bore a simple inscription, Atlas, hero, protector, friend. Atlas's voice has helped 42 kids so far. We're opening 3 more chapters next year. And the training facility? It opens in 6 months. They're going to train dogs just like you. Dogs who listen. Dogs who believe. She placed a single yellow rose at the base of the stone, then pulled something from her pocket. It was the drawing she'd made years ago, the one of her and Atlas in the courtroom. She'd kept it all these years preserved in plastic. I wanted you to have this back, she said, tucking it carefully into a waterproof box at the memorial. So you'll always remember what we did together. As she turned to leave, something rustled in the bushes nearby. Emma paused. A young German Shepherd puppy bounded out, its handler, a new K-9 officer, chasing after it. Sorry, the officer called. He's still in training. Gets excited easily. Emma knelt down as the puppy approached, tail wagging furiously. She laughed through her tears as he licked her face. What's his name? She asked. Atlas, the officer said with a smile. Atlas II, named after the legend. Emma's heart swelled. She looked at the puppy, then back at the memorial stone, then up at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. Thank you, she whispered to the universe, to the memory of a dog who'd changed her life, to the future that now felt bright and full of purpose. And as she walked back toward the parking lot, little Atlas trotting beside her, Emma knew something with absolute certainty. Heroes never truly die. They live on in the lives they touch, in the courage they inspire, in the voices they help find. Atlas had given her a voice, and now she would spend her life giving that gift to others, because that's what heroes do. The years continued to unfold. Emma graduated high school with honors, her speech at commencement moving the entire auditorium to tears as she spoke about trauma, resilience, and the German Shepherd who'd saved her life. Atlas's voice had grown from a small local program into a national organization with chapters in 37 states. Hundreds of children had found healing through the therapy dogs Emma's organization trained and placed. On Emma's 18th birthday, she received an unexpected letter. It was from Diane Mercer, the woman who'd been arrested in the courtroom that day. She'd served 5 years of her sentence and was writing from prison. Emma almost threw it away. Almost. But curiosity got the better of her. The letter was simple, handwritten on prison stationery. Emma, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that what happened in that courtroom changed me. When that dog looked at me, when you pointed at me, I saw myself through your eyes. I saw what I'd become. I've spent every day since trying to atone. I've testified in 14 additional cases. I've helped authorities dismantle 3 more trafficking rings. It doesn't erase what I did, but maybe it saves someone else from suffering. You were brave enough to point. I'm trying to be brave enough to change. Thank you for that. I'm sorry for everything. Emma read it 3 times, emotions warring inside her. She showed it to her therapist, to her parents, to Marcus. They all said the same thing. Healing takes many forms. She never wrote back, but she kept the letter, a reminder that even in darkness, change was possible. Marcus had retired from active duty, but continued to work with the K-9 training program, specializing in victim advocate dogs. He'd trained 23 dogs in Atlas's model, each one going on to help countless victims. He named every single one after stars: Sirius, Vega, Rigel, Polaris. Because Atlas had been his North Star, the one that guided everything after. On the 10th anniversary of the courtroom incident, a ceremony was held at the newly completed Atlas Memorial Training Facility. It was a state-of-the-art campus dedicated to training service and advocate dogs. Emma, now a college sophomore studying psychology and animal-assisted therapy, gave the keynote speech. She stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. Law enforcement officers, survivors, therapy dog handlers, families, the very people Atlas's legacy had touched. 10 years ago, Emma began, her voice strong and clear, I was a little girl who'd lost everything. My voice, my safety, my hope. I sat in a courtroom surrounded by adults with law degrees and badges and power, but none of them could hear what I was trying to say. She paused, gathering her emotions. Then I saw him, Atlas, A dog who'd been trained to listen, not with ears, but with instinct, with heart. When I pointed at him, I wasn't asking for a pet or comfort. I was asking for someone to believe me. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. And he did. He heard what no human could hear. He sensed what no machine could detect. And in that moment, everything changed. Not just for me, but for every child who came after me. Every survivor who found their voice through a therapy dog. Every case solved because a K9 detected what humans missed. Emma's eyes swept across the crowd and landed on Marcus, who sat in the front row with Atlas II at his side, now a fully trained victim advocate dog himself. Atlas didn't just save me, Emma continued. He showed the world that sometimes the greatest heroes walk on four legs. That trauma can be heard in ways we never imagined. That loyalty, courage, and love can come in forms we don't expect. She held up a photo, the one from the courthouse steps, young Emma with her hand on Atlas's head. This facility will train hundreds of dogs in his memory. Dogs who will sit beside frightened children in courtrooms, who will comfort survivors of violence, who will detect truth when lies seem too convincing, and every single one of them carries Atlas's spirit. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Emma smiled through her tears. After the ceremony, Marcus approached her. He'd be so proud of you. Emma hugged him tightly. We did it. We kept his promise. No, Marcus said, pulling back to look at her. You kept it. You took what he gave you and multiplied it 1,000 times over. That's not his legacy anymore. It's yours. As the sun set over the training facility, Emma walked the grounds alone. She passed training fields where young dogs learned to detect scents, classrooms where handlers studied trauma-informed care, a memorial garden where names of K9 heroes were etched in stone. And at the center of it all stood a bronze statue, a German shepherd sitting tall and proud, his eyes watchful, his bearing noble. Beneath it, a plaque read, Atlas. He heard when others could not. He believed when others would not. He loved when others did not. In memory of a hero who changed the world, one pointed finger at a time. Emma placed her hand on the statue's head, just as she'd done to the real Atlas so many years ago. I kept my promise, she whispered. Your voice still echoes. Your courage still inspires. And because of you, no child will ever have to scream into silence again. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the distant sound of barking, a new generation of Atlas dogs being trained to carry on the mission. And somewhere, in whatever place heroes go when their work is done, a German shepherd rested peacefully, his mission complete, his legacy eternal. Because he'd done what all great heroes do. He'd lit a torch and passed it on. And that torch, carried now by Emma and thousands of others, would never go out. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Because stories like this remind us that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes they wear uniforms, sometimes they wear fur, and sometimes they're little girls brave enough to point when the world needs them most. Stay tuned for more stories that prove one thing: loyalty, courage, and love can change everything.